Welcome. This is a paranormal romance featuring fated mates, lost wolf princes, and a forest girl who never wanted a crown. Settle in, and let's begin. The throne room doors slammed open, and 200 nobles turned to stare at her muddy boots on polished marble. Not his crown, ancient and gleaming under crystal chandeliers, not his eyes, wolf gold and devastating. Just his hands, trembling as they reached for the two silver-furred pups clutching her forest cloak. "You." His voice cracked across the vast hall like thunder before rain. "You brought them back." Sarah Rowan had walked 2 days through snow with nothing but a handmade carrier and silver dust bombs to keep the rogues away. She'd donated her own blood to cure them of poison just 3 nights ago. She'd rocked them through nightmares and sung off-key lullabies until her throat ached. She'd done it all because they were children, because they'd called her Mama Sarah, with eyes too old for their small faces, because leaving them had never been an option. She hadn't done it for this. For a king dropping to his knees in front of his entire court, for a man who smelled like midnight pine and desperate grief pressing his forehead to hers while the pups squealed, "Daddy, Daddy! We told you she'd keep us safe!" For the sudden, violent snap of a lavender tether wrapping around her ribs and yanking her soul toward his like they'd been tied together since before either of them drew breath. "If she saved my heart's heirs," King Ronan Voss said, straightening to his full height but never letting go of her wrist, "she already holds my crown." The throne room erupted. Nobles shouted. A woman in silk, Luna Vanessa, the queen-in-waiting everyone whispered about, dropped her wine glass. It shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces, red spreading across white stone like blood. Sarah looked at the pups, at their father, at the golden thread of pack magic glowing between all 4 of them, visible only to those who understood what it meant when broken souls recognized their missing pieces. 3 weeks ago, she'd just wanted to help 2 lost babies crying in the rain. Now a king was offering her a kingdom, and every instinct Sarah had ever trusted was screaming at her to run. Chapter 1. The Rain and the Whimpers. 3 weeks earlier, Sarah Rowan had been perfectly content with her life. She was 22 years old, alone by choice, and lived in a stone cottage at the edge of Iron Ridge territory where the forest grew thick enough to hide secrets. Her mother had been a healer, her grandmother before that. Sarah had inherited their gift for coaxing broken things back to wholeness. Bones, fevers, hearts shattered by loss. The pack left offerings at her gate, dried meat, coin, sometimes just gratitude scratched onto birch bark. She asked for nothing else, expected nothing else. The storm that changed everything started just after sunset. Sarah was grinding moon balm in her mortar, the salve that eased shifting pains, when the first crack of thunder rattled her windows. Rain came next, vicious and sideways, turning the forest path into a river of mud. She'd learned long ago not to travel in weather like this. Werewolves could navigate by scent, but she was human, breakable, easy to lose in the dark. Then she heard the crying, high-pitched, desperate, the kind of sound that bypassed logic and went straight to some ancient protective place in her chest. Sarah grabbed her cloak, her lantern, and the silver dust bombs her mother had taught her to make, protection against rogues who didn't respect healer neutrality. She stepped into the storm. The forest swallowed her whole. Rain battered her face, wind tore at her cloak. She followed the cries deeper into territory she didn't recognize, past the old oak that marked the boundary of safe travel, into the wild lands where Iron Ridge patrols rarely ventured. Mud sucked at her boots, branches clawed her skin, but the crying grew louder, 2 distinct voices now, layered over each other in perfect, heartbreaking harmony. She found them in a hunter's net. 2 pups, no bigger than house cats, tangled in silver wire that burned wherever it touched their fur. One had a white blaze across his forehead, the other had eyes like molten amber. Both were shaking so hard their teeth chattered, soaked through, half-starved, and utterly, devastatingly alone. "Oh, babies," Sarah breathed. She dropped to her knees in the mud. "Hold still." "I've got you." The net was designed to hurt shifters, silver-lined, enchanted to tighten with struggle. Sarah pulled her work gloves from her pouch and carefully began cutting them free. The pups whimpered but didn't fight. They watched her with an intelligence too ancient for their small faces, as if they understood she was the only chance they had. When the last wire fell away, they collapsed into her arms. Sarah wrapped them in her cloak. They were freezing, body temperature dropping toward shock. She needed to get them warm, fed, dry. She needed to get them home. The run back through the storm was a blur of burning lungs and whispered promises. Almost there, babies. Almost there. Just hold on. She clutched them against her chest, felt their tiny hearts hammering against her ribs, and prayed to every god she'd stopped believing in that she wasn't too late. Her cottage appeared through the rain like salvation. Sarah kicked the door open, bolted it behind her, and went straight to the hearth. She built the fire high and hot, then stripped the pups out of their soaking fur. They were too young or too traumatized to shift back to human form. She'd seen it before. Wolves who locked themselves into their animal shape when the world became too much to bear. "It's okay," she murmured, rubbing them down with warmed towels. "You're safe now. I promise." She fed them goat's milk from a dropper, one slow swallow at a time, mixed in herbs to calm their shaking, applied moon balm to the silver burns on their paws and bellies, whispering old healing songs her mother had taught her. The pups didn't make a sound, just watched her with those two old eyes, as if memorizing her face in case she disappeared like everyone else. When they finally slept, curled together on her chest, tiny paws kneading her collarbone, Sarah let herself cry. She didn't know where they'd come from, didn't know who would set a hunter's trap for children, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she would burn down the world before she let anyone hurt them again. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, 3 broken souls began to heal. Chapter 2. Milk and moon balm. The pups couldn't shift back. Sarah tried everything over the next week. Gentle encouragement, shifting stimulation herbs, even the old lullabies that were supposed to coax traumatized wolves back to their human skin. Nothing worked. They remained stubbornly, heartbreakingly furred. 2 small wolves who followed her everywhere, slept in a pile on her chest, and flinched at every unexpected sound. She named them in her head, just temporarily, just until she found their pack. Blaze for the white mark on his forehead, Amber for his golden eyes. They were clever. Too clever. Blaze figured out how to unlatch the pantry on day 3. Amber learned to herd the chickens without hurting them by day 5. And both of them understood every word she said with a comprehension that made her chest tight with questions she couldn't answer. "Who are you?" she whispered on the 7th night, stroking Amber's ears while Blaze sprawled across her lap. "Where did you come from?" Amber tilted his head, made a sound that was almost a word. Almost. Sarah's cottage became a haven carved out of routine. Mornings meant goat's milk and mashed sweet potato. Afternoons meant foraging, the pups trotting at her heels, learning which mushrooms were safe and which roots soothed fever. Evenings meant moon balm massages for their healing burns, stories told by firelight, and the kind of peace Sarah hadn't felt since her mother died. She should have been looking for their family, should have been asking around the territory, posting notices, doing something other than falling stupidly, dangerously in love with 2 orphaned pups who weren't hers to keep. But every time she thought about taking them to the village, about handing them over to strangers who might not understand how Blaze needed his ears scratched just so before bed, or how Amber had nightmares and needed to be held tight until the shaking stopped, something visceral and possessive rose up in her throat. Not yet. Just a little longer. On day 10, she found the collars. She'd been checking their silver burns, almost healed now, thank the gods, when her fingers brushed against something hidden in their thick fur. Leather. Embossed. She parted the silver strands carefully, and her heart stopped. The Iron Ridge royal sigil. 2 tiny wolves flanking a crown, engraved in metal that looked like starlight made solid. These weren't just pack pups. These were the heirs, the Alpha King's children. The princes everyone whispered had died in an ambush 6 weeks ago, killed alongside their mother when rogues attacked the royal caravan. Everyone believed them dead, but they were here, alive, sleeping in her bed. Sarah's hands started shaking. The Alpha King, Ronan Voss, the grief-mad ruler who hadn't shifted in months, thought his children were gone. The entire kingdom was mourning, and she'd been keeping them here, in her cottage, feeding them goat milk and singing them lullabies like they were hers. She should take them back immediately, should run to the palace and return them to their father. But the pups were still so fragile, still healing, and some deep, knowing part of her whispered that showing up at the palace gates with the supposedly dead princes might be more complicated than just handing them over and walking away. She needed a plan. She needed them stronger. She needed... "Mama Sarah?" The voice was small, uncertain, heartbreakingly human. Sarah looked down. Blaze had shifted. He was maybe 4 years old in human form, naked and shivering, with silver hair and eyes like storm clouds. He reached for her with both hands, and she pulled him into her lap without thinking. "Mama Sarah," he said again, like he was testing the name. "Don't leave us. Please, don't leave us." Amber shifted next, identical except for his golden eyes. He crawled up her other side and pressed his face against her neck. "We'll be good. We promise. Just don't send us away." Sarah's heart cracked open. She wrapped both arms around them, these babies who'd lost everything, who'd survived horror she couldn't imagine, who were looking at her like she was the only solid thing in a world made of smoke. "I'm not going anywhere," she promised, even though she knew it was a lie. Even though she knew their father was grieving. Even though keeping them one more day felt like theft. But they needed her right now. They needed this. So she held them while they cried, fed them real food, bread and honey and soft cheese, dressed them in clothes made from her old shirts, too big but warm. Let them sleep in her bed with their small bodies pressed against hers like they were afraid she'd disappear if they let go, and when they asked if they could stay forever, if she'd really be their mama, if their daddy would let them keep her, Sarah smiled and changed the subject because she couldn't bear to tell them the truth. She wasn't their mother. She was just a forest girl who'd found them in the rain, and in a few days she'd have to give them back to the man who actually had the right to call them his, even if it killed her. Chapter 3. The Alpha King's Mourning. 50 miles away, in the Iron Ridge Palace, King Ronan Voss was dying. Not physically. His body was still strong, broad-shouldered and scarred from decades of battle, powerful enough to break necks with his bare hands. But something vital inside him had died the day he'd buried empty coffins and pretended his sons were inside them. He hadn't shifted in 2 months, hadn't hunted, barely ate. His wolf had gone silent the moment he'd scented his mate's blood on the ground and found nothing but shredded fabric where his pups should have been. Now it was just him, hollow and human, ruling a kingdom that pitied him. The throne room felt like a mausoleum. Ronan sat through another council meeting, listening to advisors debate border disputes and trade agreements, while his hands unconsciously reached for the small wolf plushie tucked into his belt. His sons had fought over it that last morning. Blaze had won. Amber had pouted. Ronan had promised they'd take turns. He'd never kept that promise. "Your Majesty." Luna Vanessa's voice cut through his thoughts. She stood at the base of his throne, beautiful, ambitious, already playing queen even though he'd never given her the title. "The council believes it's time to discuss securing the bloodline." Ronan's jaw clenched. "My bloodline is dead." "Which is why—" "No!" The word came out as a growl. Several nobles flinched. "We're done here." He stood and left before anyone could argue. Vanessa's gaze followed him, calculating and cold, but he didn't care. Let her scheme. Let the council whisper about his grief, making him weak. They didn't understand. Couldn't. None of them had held their children as newborns, counted their fingers, promised to protect them from every darkness in the world, and then failed. His private chambers were worse than the throne room. Ronan kept their toys where they'd left them. Wooden swords crossed on the mantel, finger paintings pinned to the walls, the blanket his mate had woven before she died, still smelling faintly of lavender and safety. He touched each item like a prayer, like if he just believed hard enough, they'd come running through the door demanding stories and wrestling matches and one more treat before bed. They never did. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the empty room. "I'm so sorry I couldn't save you." His wolf stirred for the first time in weeks. Not words, it had forgotten language, just a bone-deep ache that said, "Wrong, something's wrong, they're not gone, find them, find them." Ronan pressed his palms against his eyes. "Grief did this, made you chase ghosts, hear phantom cries in the night. His sons were dead. The entire pack had searched for weeks. There were no bodies because the rogues had been thorough, because that's what you did when you wanted to destroy a bloodline completely. They were gone." He had to accept that. But his wolf wouldn't stop howling. Meanwhile, back in Sarah's cottage, the pups were growing stronger every day. By week 2, they shifted freely, human for meals and conversation, wolf for playing and sleep. They told her stories in fragments, piecing together the attack, the ambush at dawn, their mother's screams, being shoved into the river by someone who whispered, "Swim and don't look back." The confusion and terror of days wandering lost until the hunters found them. They didn't know their mother was dead. Sarah couldn't bring herself to tell them. "Will Daddy be mad we left?" Blaze asked one evening, curled in Sarah's lap while she combed his silver hair. "No, baby." Sarah kissed his forehead. "Your daddy will be so happy to see you. He's been looking for you everywhere." "But we want to stay with you," Amber protested. He was drawing in her journal, wolves and flowers and a stick figure family of 4. "Can't Daddy just come here?" Sarah's heart twisted. "It doesn't work like that. Your daddy is the Alpha King. He lives in the palace. You're princes." "Don't care." Blaze burrowed closer. "We'll tell him. We'll say, 'Daddy, this is Mama Sarah and we love her and you have to keep her forever.'" "We'll promise to share," Amber added seriously. "You can have Daddy on Mondays and Wednesdays. We'll take him the other days." "It's fair." Sarah laughed, despite the tears burning her eyes. "That's very generous of you." But that night when they slept, she stared at the ceiling and faced the truth. She had to take them back, soon. Every day she waited was another day their father grieved, another day he believed his children were dead. It was cruel, selfish, even if it meant walking away from the only family she'd felt in years, even if it shattered her. She started preparing for the journey. Chapter 4. The Trek to the Palace. Sarah left at dawn on the first day of the 3rd week. She packed light, food, water, medical supplies, and the handmade carrier she'd stitched from leather and wool. The pups rode against her chest, Blaze and Amber in wolf form because it was easier, warmer, safer. They were excited at first, thinking this was an adventure, not understanding that Sarah was walking them toward a goodbye. The trek to the palace took 2 days through early winter terrain. Sarah knew the forest paths but not the roads. She traveled carefully, avoiding pack patrols. 2 royal heirs returning from the dead would cause questions she wasn't ready to answer. Better to arrive quietly, hand them over, disappear before anyone could ask who she was or why she'd waited so long. The first day passed without incident. They camped under a rocky overhang, and Sarah let the boys shift to human form for dinner. They were chatty, playful, asking 1,000 questions about the palace they barely remembered. "Will our room still be there?" Amber wanted to know. "Will Daddy recognize us?" Blaze looked worried. "We got bigger." "He'll know you," Sarah promised, though her throat felt tight. Daddies always know their babies. That night, curled together under her cloak, Blaze whispered, "What if he doesn't like you?" "What?" "Daddy. What if he doesn't like you and won't let us keep you?" Sarah stroked his hair. "Baby, you can't keep me. I'm just the person who found you. Your daddy will take care of you now." "But you take care of us better," Amber argued, stubborn. "You know how Blaze needs his ears scratched and I need the nightlight and your daddy will learn all of that again," Sarah said firmly. He loves you so much. You'll see." They fell asleep unsatisfied, and Sarah lay awake wondering if she was making a terrible mistake. The second day, everything went wrong. They were an hour from the palace when Sarah smelled smoke. Not campfire smoke, something chemical, wrong. She'd just enough time to shove the pups deeper into the carrier and reach for a silver dust bomb before the rogues stepped out of the trees. 5 of them, scarred and feral-looking with eyes that tracked her like prey. "Well, well," the leader grinned, showing too many teeth. "What do we have here?" Little human, all alone in the woods. Sarah's pulse spiked, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm a healer." "Neutral territory. You don't want this fight." "Oh, I think we do." He stepped closer, "especially if that's what I think it is in your carrier." Her blood went cold. They'd scented the pups. "Back off," she warned, pulling a bomb from her belt. "Silver dust, 1 step closer and I'll blow us all to hell." The rogue laughed. "You'd kill yourself for wolf pups? Stupid human." "Try me." For a moment they stared each other down. Sarah's hands were shaking, but her grip stayed firm. She'd seen what rogues did to lone wolves, to children. She would die before she let them touch Blaze and Amber. Then the pups shifted. They erupted from the carrier in twin flashes of silver fur, snarling with rage that belonged to wolves 10 times their size. Their small bodies positioned between Sarah and the rogues, hackles raised, eyes blazing with protective fury that made the leader hesitate. "Royal pups," he breathed. "The dead princes." "Not dead," Blaze growled, actual words in wolf form, which shouldn't be possible for pups so young. "And you're going to leave. Now." The rogues exchanged glances. Calculation flickered across their faces. 5 against 1 human and 2 pups should be easy odds. But these weren't normal pups. These were heirs raised in power, trained from birth to command, and they absolutely would fight to the death. Sarah made the choice for them. She threw the bomb. Silver dust exploded in a cloud that sent the rogues scrambling back, coughing and clawing at their eyes. Sarah grabbed both pups, stuffed them back in the carrier despite their protests, and ran. The forest blurred around her. Her lungs burned. Behind her, she heard the rogues recovering, giving chase, their howls echoing through the trees like promises of violence. She wasn't going to make it. Then she heard different howls, deeper, organized, pack wolves. The Iron Ridge Patrol burst through the trees like vengeance made flesh. A dozen warriors in battle formation. The rogues scattered, the patrol gave chase, and Sarah collapsed against a tree trunk, clutching the pups, while the world spun and her heart tried to hammer out of her chest. A warrior approached, female, scarred, with the bearing of a beta. "Are you hurt?" Sarah shook her head. Couldn't speak. The warrior's gaze dropped to the carrier, to the 2 small faces peeking out, one with a white blaze, one with golden eyes. Her expression went absolutely still. "By the gods," she whispered, "the princes!" And just like that, Sarah's quiet plan to slip into the palace unnoticed died. Within minutes, she was surrounded by warriors. Within an hour, they were marching toward the palace in full formation. Within 2 hours, word had spread through the entire pack like wildfire. The dead princes were alive. A human girl had saved them. The Alpha King needed to see this immediately. Sarah held the pups and tried not to vomit from fear. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. She was supposed to have time to prepare, to explain, to make sure the pups were settled before she vanished back into her quiet life. Instead, she was being marched into the throne room like a prisoner or a miracle. She couldn't tell which, while the entire palace scrambled to wake their grieving king and tell him the impossible had happened. His sons had come home. Chapter 5. The Hall of Silence. The throne room was packed. Every noble, warrior, and servant who could fit had crammed inside, word spreading faster than Sarah could process. She stood at the massive doors with the pups clutched to her chest, still in their carrier, while guards whispered frantically into communication crystals and the crowd's murmur grew to a roar. Then the doors at the far end slammed open. The Alpha King entered like a storm. He was bigger than Sarah expected, well over 6 feet of solid muscle and barely contained power. His dark hair was wild, his clothes looked slept in, and his eyes— gods, his eyes were the exact shade of Blaze's storm gray, red-rimmed and devastated, and so full of desperate, dying hope that Sarah's breath caught in her throat. He saw her, saw the carrier, froze. The entire hall went silent. "No," Ronan Voss whispered, his voice cracked. "No, don't, I can't, not again." Then Blaze shifted, scrambled out of the carrier, stood on shaking legs in the middle of that vast marble floor, and said in a voice that echoed off crystal and gold, "Hi, Daddy." The king made a sound Sarah would remember until she died. Not quite a sob, not quite a howl, something broken and healing all at once. He moved, faster than human, slower than a man who believed what he was seeing, and dropped to his knees as both pups launched themselves into his arms. "Daddy, Daddy, we're home, we're okay. Mama, Sarah saved us. We were in the water and the hunters caught us, but she cut us free. She gave us milk and medicine and slept with us every night so the nightmares wouldn't come. We love her, Daddy. You have to keep her. You have to—" Ronan wasn't listening. He was pressing his face into their hair, running his hands over their bodies like he couldn't believe they were solid, breathing their scent like it was oxygen after drowning. Tears tracked down his face, his shoulders shook. The mighty Alpha King, who'd ruled through wars and plagues and political nightmares, completely undone by his children's small arms around his neck. Sarah stayed frozen by the doors. She should leave. This was private, sacred. She didn't belong here. But then Ronan looked up. Their eyes met across 50 feet of marble and 1,000 watching nobles, and the world stopped. Sarah felt it the instant before it happened, a pull in her chest like a hook behind her ribs, yanking toward him with force that stole her breath. Then light exploded between them, lavender and silver, visible to every wolf in the room, the unmistakable glow of a fated mate bond snapping into place. The throne room erupted into chaos. Wolves gasped, someone screamed. Luna Vanessa, standing near the throne in a gown that screamed she'd been playing queen, went absolutely white. And Ronan stared at Sarah like she'd reached into his chest and restarted his heart with her bare hands. "You," he said. Same word as the first time, but different now. Reverent, destroyed. "It's you." Sarah couldn't move. The bond was pulling so hard she thought it might drag her across the marble. She could smell him from here, midnight pine and smoke and something wild that made her wolfless human body respond like it had instincts she shouldn't possess. Could feel his grief and joy and desperate aching need like they were her own emotions. This wasn't possible. Fated mates required both parties to have wolves. Sarah was human. She shouldn't be able to— "The pups," someone whispered. "The bond goes through the pups." Sarah looked down. Golden light threaded from her chest to both boys, then from them to their father. A family bond, a pack bond, the kind that formed when a wolf imprinted on a protector so deeply that magic bent itself into new shapes to accommodate the impossible. The pups had chosen her as their mother, and through them, she'd become their father's mate. Ronan stood. The pups clung to his legs, but his eyes never left Sarah's face. He crossed the throne room in long strides, wolves parting before him like water, until he stood directly in front of her. Up close, he was devastating. Scars and sharp cheekbones and a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. "If she saved my heart's heirs," he said, loud enough for every noble to hear, "she already holds my crown." The throne room exploded again, protests, cheers, Vanessa's shriek of outrage. But Ronan ignored all of it. He reached out slowly, giving Sarah time to pull away, and cupped her face with both hands. "Thank you," he said roughly. "Thank you for bringing them home. Thank you for—" His voice broke. "I thought I'd lost everything." Sarah's eyes burned. "They're incredible. You should be proud." "I am." His thumbs brushed her cheekbones. The bond thrummed between them, electric and right and terrifying. "And now I owe you a debt I can never repay." "You don't owe me anything." They needed help. They needed a mother. Ronan's gaze dropped to where the golden threads connected all four of them, and apparently so did I. Before Sarah could process that, Blaze tugged on his father's shirt. "Daddy, you'll let us keep her, right?" "We already asked. She's ours." "She doesn't want to stay," Amber added, voice wobbling. "She says she's just the person who found us." "But she's not. She's Mama Sarah. Tell her she has to stay." Ronan looked at Sarah. Really looked. Past the mud and exhaustion and fear, straight into the part of her that had been alone for so long, she'd forgotten what family felt like. "Do you want to leave?" he asked quietly. Sarah opened her mouth. The honest answer should be yes. She didn't belong in palaces, didn't know how to be a queen or a mother or a mate to a king who'd loved someone else first. She was a forest healer with dirt under her nails and exactly 3 nice dresses to her name. But the pups were watching her with desperate hope, and the bond was singing that she was home, she was safe, she was exactly where she needed to be. She swallowed hard. "I don't know." "Then stay until you do." Ronan's hands fell away, but his gaze held hers. "Let us show you that you belong here. That you're not just the person who found them, you're the person who saved us all." Behind them, Vanessa started shouting about bloodlines and propriety. The nobles argued. The pups clung to both adults like they were afraid this was all a dream about to shatter, and Sarah, despite every logical reason to run, found herself nodding. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll stay." The king smiled for the first time in months. The pups cheered. The bond flared brighter, and in the back of the throne room, Vanessa's expression promised murder. Chapter 6. Clash Court. Staying turned out to be more complicated than Sarah anticipated. The nobles refused to accept her, not because she'd saved the princes, that they grudgingly acknowledged, but because she was human, common-born, a forest healer with no title, no pack, no political value. The council convened within hours of her arrival, demanding Ronan think rationally about the succession. "The bond is real," Ronan said flatly from his throne. Sarah sat in a chair beside him, not the throne, she'd refused that, with the pups sprawled across her lap. "Deny it all you want. Magic doesn't lie. Magic through children is not the same as a true mate bond," an elderly councilman argued. "Your Majesty, we respect what this woman did, honor it even, but making her queen, that's not your decision." Ronan's voice dropped to a growl that made several wolves bare their throats in submission. "My sons chose her. My wolf chose her. I chose her. We're done debating." "But Vanessa was never my mate, never my choice. If she's convinced you otherwise, that's politics, not fate." Vanessa stood in the corner, perfectly composed except for the rage in her eyes. "I've served this pack faithfully for years. I've acted as queen in all but name. You'd throw that aside for a girl who's known your sons for 3 weeks?" "Yes," Ronan said simply, "because those 3 weeks meant everything." The argument continued for hours. Sarah sat through it feeling increasingly sick. She hadn't asked for this. Hadn't wanted to disrupt an entire political structure. She just wanted to make sure the pups got home safely. When the council finally dispersed, nothing resolved, Ronan offered her a suite in the royal wing. Sarah refused. "I'll stay in the nursery," she said, "with the boys. Until they feel safe." Something flickered in Ronan's eyes. Relief, maybe, or respect. "You don't want the title." "I never did," Sarah said honestly. "I'm not here for a crown." "Then why are you here?" She looked at the pups, who'd fallen asleep in a pile against her side. "Because they asked me to be." Ronan studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "The nursery it is." Over the next week, an uneasy routine developed. Sarah lived in the prince's rooms, a massive suite filled with toys and books and windows overlooking gardens she'd only dreamed about. The pups refused to sleep without her, so she made her bed on the window seat while they took the massive 4-poster. Ronan visited every evening, to say goodnight to his sons, he claimed, but his eyes always found Sarah first. They orbited each other carefully, testing the bond, learning. Sarah discovered he was nothing like she expected. Yes, he was powerful. She'd seen him make nobles cower with a single look, but with his sons, he was gentle, patient. He sat through tea parties and played sword fights and read bedtime stories in voices that made the boys giggle. He asked Sarah about their routines, their fears, their healing, and actually listened. Blaze needs his ears scratched clockwise, she told him one night. Counterclockwise makes him grumpy. And Amber can't sleep without the nightlight shaped like a moon. He'll say he's fine, but he's not. Ronan absorbed every detail like it was sacred text. What else? They have nightmares about the river, about drowning. Sometimes they'll shift in their sleep and wake up confused. You have to hold them tight and remind them where they are. "Show me," Ronan said quietly. So Sarah did. That night, when Amber woke screaming, she and Ronan moved together, Sarah pulling him into her arms, Ronan wrapping around both of them, creating a cocoon of safety. The pup's breathing slowed, his shaking stopped. He shifted back to human and mumbled, "Mama, Papa," before falling asleep again. Ronan's eyes met Sarah's over Amber's head. The bond thrummed between them, stronger now, fed by shared purpose. "Papa," he whispered. "He called me Papa." "They missed you," Sarah said. "Every day. They were terrified you'd be angry they left." "Never." Ronan's voice was rough. "Gods, never. I just wish—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "I wish I'd found them sooner. Before the hunters, before they had to go through that alone." "They weren't alone." Sarah stroked Amber's hair. "They had each other. And they're stronger than you think. They had you." Ronan's hand covered hers on their son's head. His skin was warm, calloused, electric. "We all did, even if I didn't know it yet." The touch lasted 3 seconds too long to be casual. Sarah pulled away first, heart hammering, and Ronan let her go without comment. But the bond pulsed with want and restraint, and something that felt dangerously like forever. The palace was less kind. Nobles snubbed Sarah in hallways. Servants whispered when she passed. Vanessa orchestrated social ambushes, inviting Sarah to teas where every other woman was highborn and educated, making her feel like a performing bear. Sarah endured it all with gritted teeth, refusing to show weakness, but it wore on her. "Maybe they're right," she told Ronan one night after a particularly brutal dinner. The pups were asleep. They stood on the nursery balcony, the night air cold enough to sting. "Maybe I don't belong here." "Do you want to leave?" Same question he'd asked in the throne room. "I want—" Sarah stopped. What did she want? The pups happy and safe, yes, but also this. These stolen moments with a man who looked at her like she was the answer to questions he'd stopped asking. This feeling of mattering, of being needed for more than just her healing hands. "I want to not feel like an imposter," she finally said. Ronan turned to face her fully. "You're not. Everyone in this palace knows what you did, what you are. They're scared because you upset the order they understood. But fear isn't the same as being right. Vanessa thinks she was owed a crown." His jaw tightened. She wasn't. "She played politics well, positioned herself strategically after my mate died. But she was never mine. Never would have been, bond or no bond." Sarah studied his profile, sharp and scarred and handsome in a way that hurt. "You loved your mate." "I did," no hesitation. "Completely. She gave me my sons, saved them with her last breath. I'll honor her memory until I die." The bond ached with old grief. Sarah felt it echo through her ribs. "I'm not trying to replace her." "I know." Ronan looked at her then, and his eyes were devastatingly honest. "But I think maybe she sent you anyway. Because my boys needed a mother, and I needed—" He stopped, shook his head. "I needed someone to remind me that surviving and living aren't the same thing." Before Sarah could respond, Blaze called from inside. Another nightmare. They moved together again, practiced now, and settled the pup between them. But this time, Rowan didn't leave. He stayed in the too-small bed with his sons and their chosen mother, his hand resting on Sarah's hip like an anchor, and fell asleep for the first time in months without grief choking him. Sarah lay awake, feeling the bond pulse in time with 4 heartbeats, and tried not to think about how right this felt, how terrifyingly, perfectly right. Chapter 7. The Lavender Tether. The bond grew stronger every day. Sarah felt it in everything, the way her chest tightened when Rowan entered a room, the way she instinctively knew when he was hurting, the way his scent lingered on her skin even when they hadn't touched. It was invasive and beautiful and utterly inescapable. The pups noticed. Of course they did. "You smell like Daddy now," Blaze announced one morning, nose pressed to Sarah's neck. "It's good. Means you're family for real." "Pack scent," Amber explained to her seriously. "Means we're yours and you're ours and nobody can say different." Sarah wasn't sure that's how it worked, but she didn't argue. The truth was, she was starting to forget what her life had been like before them. Before wet noses waking her at dawn and sticky hands grabbing hers and bedtime stories that required voices for every character. Before a king who looked at her like she'd hung the moon. 3 weeks into her stay, everything changed. It was late. The pups had finally crashed after a day spent running through the gardens. Sarah was tucking them in when Rowan appeared in the doorway, still in his council clothes, looking exhausted. "Rough day?" she asked softly. "They want to formalize your position." He scrubbed a hand over his face. "Create a new title. Royal Guardian, or some nonsense that acknowledges what you've done without calling you queen." Sarah's stomach dropped. "What did you say?" "That I'd ask you what you wanted." Rowan moved into the room, careful not to wake his sons. "Because I will never force you into something you don't choose freely. Even though the bond, especially because of the bond." He was close now, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes. "Fate might have tied us together, Sarah. But choice is what makes it matter." Her breath caught. "What do you want? Honestly?" His voice dropped. "I want you to stay. Not as a guardian or a nanny or whatever title makes the nobles comfortable. As my mate, my queen, my partner. But only if that's what you want too." The bond flared between them, visible even in the dim nursery light, lavender threads wrapping around their wrists, their throats, their hearts. Sarah had spent 3 weeks pretending she could ignore it, pretending that sleeping in the same room as this man, raising his children, sharing his grief and joy and small daily moments, hadn't already made her his in every way that mattered. She was done pretending. "I want," she swallowed hard. "I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of not being enough. Of the nobles being right. Of you waking up one day and realizing you made a mistake letting some forest healer play queen." Ronan's hand came up to cup her face. His thumb brushed her cheekbone and the bond sang. "Sarah, you saved my sons when every warrior in my kingdom couldn't. You healed them, protected them, loved them when they needed it most. You've done more for this kingdom in 3 weeks than most queens manage in a lifetime. But I don't know how to, neither did I when I took the crown." His forehead pressed to hers. "We'll figure it out together. That's what mates do." Sarah's hands fisted in his shirt. She could feel his heartbeat through the fabric, fast, nervous, hopeful. Could smell his scent wrapping around her like a claim. Could taste the almost of a kiss hovering between them. "If I stay," she whispered, "I stay for real. Not just for the pups. For you. For this." She touched the bond threads. "For us. That's all I want." Ronan's voice was wrecked. "You. However you'll have me. For however long you'll stay. Forever might be complicated. Forever sounds perfect." He kissed her then, soft and careful and devastatingly thorough. The bond exploded between them, lavender light flooding the room bright enough that both pups stirred. Sarah gasped against his mouth, and Rowan made a sound that was half growl, half plea, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Blaze's sleepy voice came from the bed. "Does this mean Mama Sarah is staying forever now?" Ronan looked at Sarah, waited. She smiled. "Yeah, baby. Forever." "Good," Amber mumbled, "'cause we already told everyone you were ours." The pups fell back asleep instantly. Sarah and Ronan stayed tangled together, foreheads pressed close, the bond settling into something solid and permanent between them. "I won't bind you to grief," Ronan said quietly. "What I had with their mother, that was real, but this," he touched the lavender threads, "this is real too. Different, but real. Can you accept that?" "I'm not trying to erase her," Sarah said. "She gave you these incredible boys. Saved them with her last breath. I'll honor that. But I'll also love them, and you, with everything I have. Is that enough?" "It's everything." He kissed her again, slower this time. "You're everything." They stayed like that until dawn, wrapped in each other, the bond glowing softly, the pups sleeping peacefully nearby. And for the first time since she'd found 2 crying pups in a storm, Sarah let herself believe she was exactly where she belonged. But outside the nursery, in the dark corners of the palace, Vanessa was making plans. Chapter 8. Vanessa's Scheme and the Poison. Luna. Vanessa had not clawed her way to the top of palace politics to be displaced by a common forest girl. She'd spent years positioning herself as the obvious choice for queen. Had learned every protocol, charmed every noble, played the perfect Luna in waiting. When Ronan's mate died, she'd been patient, let him grieve, offered subtle support, waited for the moment he'd turn to her. That moment never came. And now this. A nobody with mud under her nails and 0 political training, stealing everything Vanessa had earned. It was unacceptable. So Vanessa made her move. She had allies. Nobles who agreed that bloodlines mattered. Warriors who thought the king was being manipulated by magic. And most importantly, she had connections to the rogue pack that had attacked the royal caravan, the same pack that had been paid handsomely to make it look like an ambush when it was really an assassination. Vanessa had ordered the first attack, had wanted the queen and heirs dead so she could comfort Ronan, become his necessity. It had almost worked, until that meddling healer found the pups. Time to finish what she started. The poison was subtle, slow-acting, designed to look like illness rather than murder. Vanessa slipped it into the pups' afternoon milk herself, wearing gloves, her smile perfect as she handed the tray to a servant. "For the princes," she said sweetly. "The king wants them to have extra nutrition." The servant didn't question it. Why would they? An hour later, Sarah knew something was wrong. Blaze stopped mid-sentence during story time, his face going pale. Amber clutched his stomach and whimpered. Both pups started shaking, violent tremors that Sarah recognized immediately as poison response. "No, no, no." She scooped them both up, her healer instincts screaming, "Stay with me, babies! Stay with me!" She locked the nursery door, sent a guard running for Ronan, began brewing the antidote with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Wolfsbane, silver extract, moon water, but it wasn't enough. The poison was too strong, too specifically designed to kill young shifters. "Mama," Blaze gasped, "hurts." "I know, baby. I know." Sarah's mind raced. There was one more option, one last catalyst that might work. "I need you to be brave for me, okay? Both of you." She took the knife from her belt and cut her own palm, let her blood drip into the antidote mixture, human blood with its strange immunity to silver, and prayed to God she didn't believe in that it would be enough. The pups drank, gagged, drank more. Slowly, agonizingly, the shaking stopped. Color returned to their faces. They slumped against Sarah, exhausted but alive, and she held them so tight her arms ached. Ronan burst through the door moments later, wild-eyed and terrified. "What happened?" "Poison." Sarah's voice was flat, cold. "Someone tried to kill your sons. Again." The king's face went absolutely feral. His wolf rose so close to the surface his eyes glowed gold. Who? I don't know yet. Sarah looked down at the pups sleeping against her chest, at the faint silver burns on their lips from the poison. But I'm going to find out. And when I do? Her eyes met Ronan's, and in them he saw the same protective fury that lived in his own chest. They're going to wish they'd never been born. We hunt together, Ronan growled. Together, Sarah agreed. But first, she had a confrontation to stage. That evening, Sarah walked into the throne room covered in her son's blood and her own, carrying the vial of poison she'd extracted from their systems. The court was in session. Vanessa sat near the throne, looking perfectly composed. Sarah walked straight up to her and backhanded her across the face. The slap echoed like a gunshot. Vanessa's head snapped to the side. The court erupted in chaos. But Sarah's voice cut through it all, cold and clear. You came for cubs. Now you face the lioness. How dare you? Vanessa started. This. Sarah held up the vial. Is wolfsbane and silver extract, designed specifically to kill young shifters. It was in my son's milk. The milk you personally delivered. Vanessa's eyes flickered. That's ridiculous. I would never. You ordered the first attack, Sarah continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. The ambush that killed their mother. You wanted them dead so you could comfort the king, so you could slide into the role you think you deserve. Lies! Vanessa looked to the nobles for support. She's making wild accusations because she knows she doesn't belong here. Then explain the gloves. Sarah nodded to a guard, who produced the silver-dusted gloves found in Vanessa's chambers. Explain the communication crystals linked to the rogue pack. Explain the transfer of funds from your accounts to theirs the week before the attack. The throne room went silent. Ronan stood, moved to stand beside Sarah, his presence a wall of barely contained violence. Is it true? Vanessa's composure cracked. You were supposed to choose me. I earned it. I worked for years. You murdered my mate. Ronan's voice was death itself. You tried to kill my children. Twice. Because they were in the way, Vanessa screamed. Because you were so obsessed with your perfect little family that you couldn't see what was right in front of you. She didn't get to finish. Ronan's hand was around her throat faster than human sight could track. You will stand trial. You will confess every detail, and then you will be exiled to the rogue lands you funded, where they can deal with your treachery themselves. Vanessa clawed at his grip, but Ronan's hold didn't waver. Guards moved in. Chains appeared. Within moments, the would-be queen was dragged from the throne room, still screaming accusations and justifications. Sarah watched her go, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. Then she turned to the court. I didn't come here for a crown, she said clearly. I came because 2 pups needed help. But I'm staying now, not as a guardian, not as a guest, as their mother, as the king's mate, as your queen. And if anyone has a problem with that? Her eyes swept the nobles, daring them to challenge her. You're welcome to take it up with me personally. No one spoke. Ronan's hand found hers, their fingers lacing together. The bond flared bright enough to light the room, and slowly, one by one, the wolves in the throne room dropped to one knee. Not in submission, in recognition. She was pack now. She was theirs. She was queen. Sarah squeezed Ronan's hand and let herself believe it. Epilogue. Crown of woodland flowers. The coronation happened in the forest where it all began. Sarah refused a traditional ceremony in the throne room. That's not who we are, she told Ronan. Not who I am. If I'm going to be queen, we do this my way. So they held it in a clearing 3 miles from her old cottage, under ancient trees that had witnessed centuries of pack history. The entire kingdom came, nobles and commoners, warriors and healers, wolves and humans. They stood in rings around a natural stone circle, while Sarah walked forward in a dress woven from silver thread and forest flowers. Blaze and Amber walked beside her, proud in their formal clothes, carrying the crown they'd helped make, woven from their favorite flowers, strengthened with melted silver from the hunter traps that had nearly killed them, a crown that represented survival, healing and love that chose itself despite impossible odds. Ronan waited at the center of the circle, looking devastating in formal armor, his eyes tracking Sarah's every step. When she reached him, he dropped to one knee. "My heart," he said, voice carrying across the silent crowd. "My heirs. My kingdom. Already yours." He took the crown from his sons and placed it on Sarah's head. The bond between them exploded into lavender rain that fell across the entire clearing, visible to every wolf present. Magic recognized what they'd built, not just a mate bond, but a family, a pack, a future. Sarah pulled him to his feet and kissed him while the crowd roared approval. The pups tackled them both, and they all ended up in a pile on the forest floor, laughing and crying and holding each other while centuries-old trees whispered their blessing. Later, during the feast, Sarah stood to address her people. "I walked into these woods to save 2 lost souls," she said. "I walked out with a kingdom that taught me love doesn't need a title. It just needs a heartbeat willing to fight for what matters." She looked at Ronan, at Blaze and Amber, at the faces of wolves who'd doubted her, and now called her queen. "Thank you for teaching me that belonging isn't about where you're born. It's about who you choose to protect, who you choose to love, who you choose to become." The kingdom howled their acceptance, and Sarah, the forest healer who never wanted a crown, realized she'd found something better. She'd found home. 1 year later, the nursery was chaos. Twin babies, a girl and a boy, had joined the family, keeping Sarah and Ronan perpetually exhausted and deliriously happy. Blaze and Amber took their big brother duties seriously, teaching the twins how to howl and shift and protect Mama from the mean nobles, who still sometimes tried to challenge her authority. Sarah had opened the palace to orphaned shifters, creating a sanctuary for pups who needed homes. The nursery wing was always full of laughter, tears, healing, and the kind of love that multiplied instead of dividing. And every night, Ronan would find Sarah on their balcony, the same balcony where they'd first admitted wanting each other, and pull her close. "Happy?" he'd ask. "Exhausted," she'd answer. "Covered in baby spit-up. Pretty sure I haven't slept in 3 days." That wasn't the question. Sarah would smile and lean into his chest, feeling the bond pulse steady and sure between them. "Deliriously happy." "Good." He'd kiss her temple. "Because you're stuck with us now." Best trap I ever walked into. And in the nursery, surrounded by the pups they'd saved and the children they'd made and the future they were building one heartbeat at a time, love continued to grow. Not because of crowns or titles or magical bonds, though those helped, but because of choice. Because every day, they chose each other, chose this family, chose to believe that the best things in life often started with 2 lost souls crying in the rain, and someone brave enough to answer. Thank you for listening to She Saved 2 Wolf Pups in the Woods. If you enjoyed this story of fated mates, found family, and a forest girl who became queen, please like, subscribe, and check out more paranormal romances on this channel. Until next time, may you always answer the cries in your own storms.